Good evening, everyone. It is that Weems guy here for another episode, and this one is going to be a bit off of our beaten path because it's not going to deal with firearms training or the evolution of firearms training. It's going to deal with a rather sensitive topic. Steve Moses brought the idea forward to me and our guest tonight, and it is an important topic, and we're going to divert from our um, normal content to have this. I also would like to say that this is sort of a sister episode to one that was on Brian Eatrich's show, the Off Duty On Duty podcast. It's either Off Duty On Duty or On Duty Off Duty. I can never remember which one. In which the Steve and Sherri were both on there. So I will put a link to that episode in the show notes for this one, so that people who listen to this one can also get to that one if they're of interest. With that, we're going to go, Steve. If you would introduce yourself and kind of set the stage for tonight.
Well, my name is Steve Moses. I've been a firearms trainer for almost 30 years, former law enforcement, have multiple firearm and other defensive tactics instructor certifications. I'm licensed in the state of Texas to both do personal protection or executive protection. I'm also licensed as a personal protection officer instructor. I work for the Farm Trainers Association as a content contributor, and I do customer support for them as well. One of the things that I like to do is kind of, since I've started writing content for FTA, also wrote content for CCW Safe, is bring topics of interest to concealed carriers or armed homeowners or anybody that's really kind of concerned about personal protection, whether it's for themselves or their families or both. So I kind of keep my ear to the ground looking for topics. I met Sherri last January at a bruncheon. It was called the Better Beginnings Brunch. Uh, it was set up for the benefit of Cross Timbers Family Services in Stephenville, Texas. Cross Timbers Family Services, they are a professional organization, nonprofit, that ministers to victims of sex trafficking, sexual assault, domestic violence, and other, criminal acts of that nature. Provide a lot of support for the victims of that, both men and women, largely women. My wife is the financial director over there, so I'm somewhat, aware of what they're doing over there, and we try to support them. Well, at this brunch that mentioned a few minutes ago, they did a panel. Sherri was a member of that panel on sex trafficking, and being a father and a grandfather. This is something that okay, I need to be aware of it. And at the end, I became very, very concerned about what I heard when I realized that maybe some people that I thought were not necessarily at risk were far more at risk than I had originally thought. And I think that most people think. To that end, I got with Sherri, and I think I mentioned to you earlier that I badger her. I badgered her to appear on a podcast with myself and Brian Eastrich, where we covered the crime of sex trafficking in pretty good detail. Uh, Once I got that out, I thought maybe I'd like to tackle the subject of sexual assault. I think that's actually more common in the area that Sherri and I are located in than sex trafficking. And when I started thinking about it and I started actually counting the number of females I know that have actually been victims themselves of sexual assault, I was kind of like, oh my God, that is a lot. And more we're hearing of, mostly men. Women sometimes are involved committing some heinous acts. And I think, you know what? I think it's real important to kind of get that message out there. I've also become a little bit more involved in doing some women only classes. I was a presenter at the Girl to Gun National Conference for the last 2 years. And as I work with some of those women and start to know them, I kind of dial into some of the things that they're concerned about, not only for themselves, but for their children, their grandchildren. I thought, you know what? Sexual assault is a topic that we really need to have a little bit better working knowledge of. And we might just be able to get this message out to people that maybe will cause them to make some decisions that will either lessen the chances that they are the victim of a sexual assault or pick up on something that's just not right and take some action that allows them to get away before it's actually initiated, or in some instance, especially when it comes to concealed carriers, maybe buy them some time and opportunity where they can more effectively defend themselves.
All right, Sherry.
Hi, I retired out of Fort Worth Police Department after 28 years. I didn't move around a lot. I did 14 years in patrol and I did 14 years in sex crimes and human trafficking. 8 of those years I was a detective and 6 of those years I supervised the detectives. And then I retired and came out to Tarleton. So I'm out in Erath County now. I've stayed because the DA's office is great. The officers out at Tarleton are some of the best. We have retired Houston, Dallas, Arlington, Odessa, a retired Marine, 7 Fort Worth retired officers are out here. So we have about 500 years experience in the building. So when the students come in for help, we know how to help them.
Okay. Give kind of a breakdown of what would actually be considered sexual assault. And for the audience, please understand, be kind of a general definition because every state's got their own wording and what will constitute a particular crime.
True. The Texas Penal Code defines sexual assault or rape as any non-consensual, unwanted sexual contact that's compelled against another person that involves penetration and where the perpetrator knew and or intended to cause that harm. There are other crimes that cover other types of sex-related offenses, but it doesn't mean there isn't a crime if there's no penetration. It just is generally going to be a different law. There's indecent assault, indecent exposure, and a lot of other titles, but rape does require the actual penetration of a sexual nature.
Okay. In Texas law, can a male be raped?
Absolutely.
So that's one of the idiosyncrasies of state laws. In Georgia, a male may not be raped under our law. There's a different crime that would cover it. It's just not called rape. It would be a sexual battery. Rape is specifically defined as, the woman being a victim. It's one of those odd things. We got 50 states, 50 different ways of doing things.
Rape is rape is rape.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was real interesting was I always just kind of thought of a rapist is a rapist is a rapist. But after talking to Sherri, I learned that there are like maybe 5 different types of rapists. I actually wrote it down.
Mhm.
So I was afraid I'd forget them. Lack of consent rape, acquaintance rape, date rape, stranger rape, and serial rape. And I bet Sherri can probably elaborate on what the differences are on those different types.
Lack of consent is a case by case, and those type of cases, words are the factor. And because of the words and words being the only factor, those are definitely a case by case. So we really could do a whole podcast on lack of consent. So today we'll kind of concentrate on the acquaintance, date rape, stranger rape, and serial rape. And don't get caught up on those labels. The only thing those labels do for us is let us know how the rapist selected his victim. Date rape's actually not a legal term, and whoever coined that phrase did a grave disservice to those victims, because if you stop somebody out on the street and ask them what date rape was, 7, maybe 8 out of 10 of those people will say something like, well, he was getting back for the dinner he paid for, or for that $200 bottle of wine he bought her. And that's not the case. They are all defined by the factor that compels the rape. So the force, the weapon, the gun, rope, knife, the threats, the strong arm of the bat. A date rape victim, an acquaintance victim, can be just as stabbed, just as forced, just as held at gunpoint, and just as threatened. The label really doesn't define the compelling factor or the force that's used. Does that make sense?
Mhm. So how would you define it? David?
The date rape It's the same
Mhm.
force. It just
Yeah.
tells you how the victim was selected. Did he take her out to dinner first? Did he lunge at her in a stairwell? The force is the
Mhm.
same. So if you don't
Yeah.
have the compelling factor or the force, then you don't have a rape, no matter how the rapist selected
Mhm.
his victim.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right.
there are factors that go into those. The stranger rapist, the real live guy jumping out of the
Mhm.
bushes that everyone fears, the stranger rapist tends to select the victims who are alone. That's the victim he tends to try to rape. The serial rapist selects his victims with some sort of commonality, a defining characteristic. Like in Fort Worth, we had a
Mhm.
serial rapist who raped girls with black hair, who parted their hair down the middle, who were 5'2" and shorter and thin build. He had a very specific reason, but he had a very specific victim. And so a serial rapist will pick a characteristic, where a stranger rapist will pick his victim by her being alone. That's what he tends to look for. And nothing is
Mhm.
in the criminal element is absolute. So we can generally talk about what almost always works, never always. And we can talk about most cases. 7 out of 10 is usually the stat number that I use. If 7 out of 10 of my rapists say one thing, or 7 out of 10 of my victims say another, that's generally what I go with. A date rape. In one date rape case we had, he accompanied her home to her home. When she unlocked the door, he bum rushed her in and stabbed her with a knife that he had all through the date. So does it make sense that there is no such thing as really date rape?
Mhm.
And
Right.
a lot of people don't understand that. In another stranger rape case, he followed her home from a bar and kicked in her door. That's a very prevalent factor, is somebody coming up when you're unlocking your door and bum rushing you in. I see that a lot.
Do you have any kind of statistical breakdown on, the percentages of which, yeah, how many acquaintance or date rapes versus how many stranger rapes versus how many serial?
Serial rapists are the most rare.
Mhm.
Stranger rapes are right by that. Date rape and acquaintance rape are more prevalent because the rapist has
Mhm.
easier access to these victims. So that alone makes, but a rapist is a rapist. He will do whatever it takes to meet his goal, and his goal is to rape someone. And that's what's interesting about these crimes, is human trafficking is motivated by money. Sexual assault is motivated by hate, power, and control. And what a lot of people don't realize is sexual assault is not motivated by sex. Very early in my career, I interviewed a rapist, and he had forced a woman by bodily force. He was a former Marine, and he raped her. And I was sitting 3 feet from him, and I said, Michael, you can go to any bar in this city and get willing sex. Why did you have to harm her? Why'd you have to hurt her? Why did you have to force her? And he said, ma'am, it's not about sex. It's about hate. I hated my mother, and I never thought that I could hate anyone more, and then I married it. So very early in my career, I realized that rape is not about sex.
Well, did you tell me at one time that a lot of date rape and acquaintance rape has in common a sense of entitlement by the
Uh,
rapist?
that's a motivating factor, sure. But rape can be motivated by power, hate, control, and a sense of entitlement or arrogance, but it isn't motivated by sex itself.
One of the things I always thought about date rape was I always kind of thought it was something where two people had at least consented to be with each other for at least a short period of time. Uh, so it always kind of struck me as okay, well, it just seemed like maybe the guy just forced himself upon the female. It was not necessarily going to be that violent, but something that I believe that I discovered, Sherri, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in many instances, even date rapes can be just horribly violent.
Well, they're just as violent. If you took the title out, you would end up with rape. So whatever force or compelling factor he used defines the rape, not the title. Date rape, acquaintance rape, those actually aren't legal terms. They're just terms that we use.
Yeah,
But
the more
they actually,
the more
I'm sorry.
yeah, the more to differentiate between the people knew each other versus it was a stranger abducting someone off the street.
Right, right. Yes, everyone has to fear the serial rapist. The date rapist just selects his victim by however you would at church or school or online, however that's just an easy way for him to select his victim. That's all. It's still motivated by the exact same thing: power, hate, and control. It doesn't matter how he selects them. From a legal standpoint, the force he uses is the force he uses. And a date rape victim can be held at gunpoint and stabbed as easily as the stranger or the serial. The stranger rapes, the cases we saw a lot with stranger, that's the bar scenario. He sees somebody, picks someone out of the bar and follows her home. That's a stranger type thing. Acquaintance is where he may talk to her for 30 minutes at a party. They're not total strangers, but they have no relationship. And then date is where they went on a date or some type of consensual beginning to that incident. That's really why you use those titles. As a detective, it gave me the clue of how did this one find her? How did he pick her out? And then I would say, okay, based on the facts, it's acquaintance, date, serial, or stranger. And it just gives us different clues to look for in solving the case and proving it up. That's all it does. It doesn't have anything to do with the amount of force.
Speaking of proving, I think now would be a good time to explain to the audience what it means, what the term elements of a crime is, and then what all you have to prove when you're trying to prove a rape case.
You have to prove that he intended or knew, and that's a pretty easy one to prove. And the elements that you have to prove are she has to have felt compelled by some way to the rape. He has to use force or a compelling factor. She can't just stare at ceiling tiles and have a migraine and say that he knew I didn't want to have sex and he did it anyway. Those are not elements of a crime. Elements of a crime are, you have to look at the compelling factor. What did he do or say to cause her to believe that she had no choice? And those are the elements of the crime. What is that factor or factors that he used?
All right, well, let's get even a little bit more elementary than that for the audience. When we talk about elements of a crime, the legislature, no matter which state it is, or the federal government, when they create a law, nothing's illegal until there's a law that says it's illegal. The actual crime will be defined, and part of that definition will be listed elements, and you must satisfy all of those elements in order to have that crime. You know, it's commonly we'll get people, you need to go arrest that person for, and they just make some title up out of thin air, whatever. It's like, okay, I'll hand you my code book, and if you can find that in there, I'll be happy to go arrest them. And that's just not how it works. We don't get just to say that person's doing something we don't like or we think should be wrong, so we're going to arrest them for that. They must meet the definition and the elements of a law that has been specified by the respective legislature. And sometimes that crimes are broken down into degrees. If you've been educated by Hollywood, you've probably heard of first degree murder, second degree murder, etc. That's not true in every case. Like in my state of Georgia, we have murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. There's no degrees except for there's a very specific thing for a second degree. Um, but we don't have so-called first degree murder. We have no attempted murder statute in Georgia law. We have a general criminal attempt statute that just basically says if you attempt to commit any crime, then you're charged under the criminal attempt. So typically most what would be basically an attempted murder gets prosecuted as an aggravated assault because those elements then are easy to prosecute. When it gets into the various sexual assaults, rape is what we think of more commonly, but there are other forms of sexual assault. We have to prove each and every specified element of that crime. And if there's a hang up on any one of the elements, it makes it hard to prove that crime and get a conviction in court. And I'll throw it back to you two.
Yeah, you have to follow the evidence. You have to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt that it was unwanted. And that's why the lack of consent cases are so difficult, and they're case by case. But in the other types of rape, you'll have injury, you'll have the force used, you'll have possibly witnesses, I always tell my victims, 90% of my case evidence comes from my victim. She's going to come in and tell me what happened, what that factor was, what the force was used, and why she felt like she had no choice. And that's so important because you have to meet that element of rape, which is how did he force her to submit? And that is the golden ticket to a rape case is what did he do? What did he say? What did he use? What did he threaten her with? What weapon did he have? And it can be a lot of different factors. But yes, you do have to prove the element of a compelling factor. And a compelling factor can be too intoxicated to consent. And we can get into that a little bit. It's not a crime, the way the law is written, to have sex with a drunk girl. It's a crime to have sex with her if she shows a visible, recognizable sign of incapacitation. If she says, I'm too drunk, it can be something that simple. I'm too drunk for this. If she's falling down, throwing up, unconscious, in and out of unconsciousness, if she is falling on the floor, needs help standing, any of those are called what we look for compelling factor. If she is exhibiting those signs or any of those signs, then it could be a lack of consent crime if he proceeds. But everyone mixes that up and thinks you can't have sex with a drunk girl. So there's a very distinct difference in that type of lack of consent. The force rapes are easy. You can't compel someone by a gun, a knife, a bat, or threatening them or strong arming them. Those are easier to prove up than the intoxication cases. Those are usually a little bit harder to prove. But a rapist is motivated, and his goal is to achieve rape without chaos. Rapists generally don't like chaos. They generally look for quiet and complacent and compliant victims. They don't like noise. They don't like mace. They don't like trouble. They certainly don't like chaos. They don't like whistles. They don't like anything that'll bring attention to them accomplishing their goal. And so what I always tell when I teach these classes is when you are a victim and you realize that you are about to be a victim of a rape, you were selected for whatever reason. But one thing that a lot of my victims have in common is they were walking with headphones or ear pods in their ears. My best advice, if you're going to jog and you want to jog or walk to music, play it on your phone, not an actual earpiece, because at least when you play it out loud on your phone, you can hear the other noise. A lot of my stranger serial rape victims were attacked because they had those AirPods in and they were paying no attention. And what is important to know is when you are in that moment and you realize that you're about to be a victim, you have to listen to your instinct, your intuition, whatever, little bird, whatever you call it, but it's a survival instinct. So if you listen to that, it will direct you how to act, because there are as many different reactions as there are people. And the goal is to stay alive and not be a victim of rape. So you have to listen to that feeling, that intuition, and it will tell you what to do. But if it tells you to fight, you need to know how. And most, of course, we can never say all or always, but most of my victims that fought back, the rape was actually unsuccessful, because rapists don't pick someone that they believe will cause that kind of commotion or fight back. Rapists don't want to fight. They want to compel and quickly get her to where he needs her to be to rape her. That's his ultimate goal, and he'll do whatever means he sees necessary. I worked a rape case on a girl that was walking out of Walmart with her Walmart sack. This case kind of taught me the randomness sometimes of rape.
Mhm.
And she didn't really pay any attention. It was dark, 10:30 at night. She walks to her car. The rapist was driving through the Walmart parking lot and spotted her. And what I interviewed both of them, and what motivated him to pick her was that she was alone at night. So he followed her over a bridge to her apartment. She gets out, she grabs her Walmart sack, and he lunges on her. She fought him all over the apartment sidewalk. It was actually an easy case for me. It was all captured on apartment video. She fought him all over that sidewalk. She was very battered, and so was he, and he did not succeed. He ended up running off. She bit him, she clawed him, she fought him, she did everything. The video showed us that he pulled his pants down, and when he did that, she bit him. So she did everything she knew. She had taken a couple of self-defense classes. She was a nursing student. So she did everything she knew to do to not be a victim. She was still traumatized. And she ended up quitting nursing school and moving to Wyoming with her parents till she could kind of get her bearings straight again.
Mhm.
And it was a sad case, but about a month later, her mom called me, and her mom said, I just wanted to tell you that my daughter and I were sitting out on the porch, and we had the door open into the house, and they could hear the news. And the news said, I guess this is what happens in Wyoming, but the news says, everybody shelter inside, there's a mountain lion loose. And the mom said to her daughter, come on in, we need to go in. And the daughter said, I've already fought a wild animal in Fort Worth. And she won, although she was injured. Her goal was to not be raped, and she succeeded. He told me when I interviewed him that he did not expect she would fight back. And when she did, he tried to fight her, but he was ill prepared, because a lot of rapists are weak men, and they're cowards. And a lot of them pick women that they think will not fight back, or women that aren't paying attention. So my best advice is don't use the ear pods, don't use the headphones, don't do anything that blocks your ability to see, pay attention, and hear your surroundings. That's so important. And people know this stuff, they just don't know that they know. But there's all kinds of tips. If you'll pay attention, chances are you won't be selected. Rapists do not want fights.
Steve, you got anything?
Yeah, one of the things that just kind of came to mind was at the last tactical conference, Tom did a really good block on home invasions, and he talked about this case where a rapist targeted this woman and her daughter in an Aldi's grocery store, followed them around the store. When they left, he followed them. You know, they never picked up on him. He got their address, and then he started texting back and forth with his buddy, and they planned this home invasion. Matter of fact,
Mhm.
it took several days for that. Are you familiar with that story, Lee? where
Mhm.
basically
Okay.
two rapists came in. I think they came into the house. They hit the husband with a baseball bat, took him down in the basement, and then tied him up there. They then forced the woman to go to a bank and withdraw, a large sum of money. She made an attempt to communicate with the teller there that this, criminal offense was taking place. They called the police. For whatever reason, the police didn't go in. These people came back and they eventually killed her. I believe they strangled her
Mm.
and they raped the two young daughters and then set them on fire. Just a horrible,
Yeah.
horrible crime. And so I don't think that a lot of people realize that there may be someone who's watching you and checking you out to see if you're a potential victim. And if indeed that is the case, if while you're out in public, if you're looking around, if you're noticing things, if you see the same person in several places in the same store, as you walk out to your car, you're looking around, you see someone following you, you think that there's somebody following you in a car. If you get that kind of hinky feeling, Sherry's got a real good analogy for that, then you need to act upon that. But the end result is, the man probably never thought that he would be a victim of a crime that involved
Mhm.
rape, but it can very easily, involve anyone.
His whole family was annihilated.
Yeah, a good piece of advice is just never give up. Uh, it keeping on is sometimes the only way you'll survive it and not be a victim. The odds of fighting back will give you a better chance usually than not. But like I said, that pay attention to that instinct, it will direct you. Don't talk on the phone when you're out walking. I've had hundreds of rapists in interviews tell me that's what they looked for. Somebody on their phone. They didn't pick the one who looked straight at them, made complete eye contact, the one paying attention, the one not on her phone, the one not with her ear pods in her ears, the one taking care of her business. They've told me they didn't pick her for those reasons. Rapists favor the unprepared. And sometimes it really is that simple. Prepare yourself. What surprises me is I'm a military brat. So every time we moved to a foreign country, the first thing my dad did was teach us the route to the American embassy. Because when you're in a foreign country, the American embassy is your lifeline. So it surprises me that parents don't do that with their kids and spouses don't do that with each other. But you should know when you're coming home from Kroger, you should know where your police station is, the closest one to your house, the closest police station to where you frequent, where you tend to go out a lot, where you tend to shop. You should know where those police stations are. And if you think you're being followed,
Mhm.
you are, and you should never go home. If you suspect someone's following you or watching you, don't go home. Go to that police station that hopefully now, after people listen to me say that, they will go and route out their nearest police station. Because the last thing you need to be doing is going home. Had that girl, the wild animal girl, had she watched, she would have known that those headlights behind
Mhm.
her turned when she turned, but she just paid no attention. Like most people, you don't think you're
Yeah.
being watched and you don't think you're being selected. But she had probably 3 miles to figure out somebody was following her, and she didn't know to look. So if you suspect, it's probably true. That instinct that I'm going to tell you an analogy on in a minute will better shore that up for you. So learn your police station, learn to, if you can help it, there's no reason to get gas for a single lone female or a single lone male to get gas at midnight. Why would you do that?
Mhm.
Why would you put yourself in a situation if it can be avoided? Fill your car up at noon or 3 p.m. So some of it is it worth it? Do you really need
Yeah.
that beer or that Dr. Pepper or that pack of cigarettes at 10 p.m.? thinking no. So prepare, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. It really is the key to a lot of this.
Let me interject something real quick because I've got a real life example of what you were talking about, not knowing where the police departments are. Uh, I've been doing this 24 years. In year 21 or two, very early on in my career, we had, I guess you would call him a serial rapist, but he was abducting. There wasn't a pattern to who he was abducting, other than the fact that he was abducting women that he could isolate, and he was taking them off and raping them. And he attempted to kidnap a girl who was walking back from a college class, and she managed to escape from him. And she ran to a car of friends that were coming to pick her up. She jumped in the car with her friends. They drove right past the police station to get back to their sorority house. Sat around and discussed it for 20 minutes and then called the police. Hey, our friend, we think was just attempted to be kidnapped by the serial rapist guy that's abducting people.
Mm.
Yeah, I was in the area. You know, if they'd have gone right down to the PD and, hey, this guy just tried to abduct her, we would have swarmed it. I was probably 200, 300 yards away, separated by buildings. And I was on foot, but other units in car would have easily swarmed the area. Maybe we would have caught that guy that night. And I'm not sure if it was that night or another night that he managed to capture another victim. I think he got up to 3 or 4 before we finally were able to capture him. It was actually another agency that caught him, but they caught him in the act of trying to abduct a girl. But if that had the thing, it's go straight to the PD, go straight to your local sheriff's office somewhere, get on 911 on the phone and get to call the 911 to get the cops started in that direction right then.
We can't help if we don't know.
Yep.
Rapists will sometimes spot their intended victim in public areas and then they'll stalk them. We had a serial rapist at a college and in Fort Worth. None of the stuff I talk about today is Tarleton. I haven't been here long enough for any of these cases to actually go to court to be public information. But we had a college serial rape case. And in his particular case, he wanted to rape college students. So he selected them by their parking sticker on their windshield, or he selected them from the Starbucks type establishments where the students go in and study. The common factor in his victims was they never noticed him. And some of those victims he watched for 3 days. He watched them come and go for 3 days. And the one thing they said was they never knew. So they didn't pay attention. And that really can't be stressed enough. You have to be aware. You have to know what's going on. You can't live in a bubble or in oblivion because the chances are if you do that, you'll be a victim. And ideally, we should all never be anyone's victim. And don't make it easy on them. Don't make it easy for them to select you. I like those rape whistles. Those are really good. If you can buy one, find one, keep those on your key ring. Rapists don't like that. They don't like any kind of attention. So that's always what I stress. There is an analogy we got from a book called The Gift of Fear. You've probably heard of it. Gavin de Becker wrote it. And one of the analogies that he uses is the ice maker analogy. And it's very true. If I could get people to pay attention to that instinct, that intuition, whatever you call it, little bird, whatever you want to call it. But that instinct's job is to steer you from harm, and it will never lead you into harm. It will always be your head start to danger. And so a good analogy for that is if you're spending the night with a friend, it's the first time you've been there, or you're in a brand new home or an apartment, whatever, and the ice maker drops the ice in your freezer and you hear that kind of crashing sound. it will wake you up. It will scare you and it will wake you up. And until your intuition, your brain realizes that's the ice maker, go back to sleep. I'm not in danger from it. So if you can picture that feeling, that moment of fear, and when you feel that, don't ignore it. A lot of people ignore it. I've had a lot of victims tell me, I knew I shouldn't have. I knew better. Well, that's that feeling I'm talking about, that you need to not ignore. You need to listen to it. It will steer you from danger. If you're at a party and you feel that feeling, that fear, leave. Or if you can't leave, lock yourself in a bathroom or a bedroom until you can get help. But people don't listen. A lot of girls, a lot of victims have told me, girls in particular, I remember one guy telling me, I had the feeling, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had a sinking feeling. Those are all descriptions of this warning sign that we all have. It's a survival sign. And they tell me, I didn't want to be rude. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't said anything. And I say he just because it's easier. Most of my rapists are he, most of my victims are she, although it's very interchangeable. But they tell me they didn't want to be rude. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. I thought it was just me. And they don't listen to that head start and they find themselves in trouble. And if I could get people to pay attention to that feeling, and almost everybody has experienced that ice maker fear. But hang on to that feeling and pay attention and listen to it. It will steer you from danger if you learn to recognize it and listen to it. And I always thought Gavin DeBecker did a good job on that ice maker analogy, because it's something we can all relate to. And then now we can think back to times we felt that feeling and either acted on it and it saved us, or we didn't act on it and it hurt us. But everybody has felt that fear, that feeling. So that's very important.
I grew up way out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you had to go to the middle of nowhere and take a left to get where I lived. And when I went off to college, I moved into, for me, what was a large city. On the grand scheme of things, it wasn't. And I lived near where the the trains swapped tracks in the city. And I did not know this when I moved into the apartment. And then the very first night I was sleeping in my new apartment, 3 o'clock in the morning. Wow, wow. And I jumped up. It was, I had a Ruger Super Single 6 and 22 Magnum and a 12 gauge shotgun. And I was jumping up, grabbing, what on earth is that? And it finally dawned on me. Okay, that's some sort of noise way out. And like the next day, I went out in the daylight looking for what could have been the source to that noise. And, oh, there's the switch yard. And I figured out what it was. And after that, I just slept right through it.
See, because your that intuition instinct has already ruled that out as danger. That's why you were able to sleep through it.
I did live right next to a liquor store, which was cleverly enough, the road that I lived on was called Hill Street. The name of the liquor store was Hill Street Booze. And there was a guy, I can't make it up, with a leaf blower would get out there every Saturday morning and clean the parking lot with the leaf blower. And I never got to where I could sleep through that, but I got where I could sleep through those trains.
Right, but you couldn't sleep for that because it was annoying, not because it was dangerous.
Right.
So that's that feeling.
Yeah, I just remember that first night when those trains slapped together, just jumping up, completely wide awake. Yeah, I think that is a good thing. Is people will talk ourselves out of what we know to be a scary situation.
Right.
Like
a lot of women,
we pick up on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. A lot of women will say, oh, I didn't want to be a bitch. Well, it's okay to be a bitch. If you're feeling uncomfortable, there's usually a reason for that. If you feel scared or that fear, there's usually a reason. So it's okay to be a bitch. If a guy stops a girl and asks for directions or asks for help to fix his tire or his car, walk on. There's no guy that's legitimately going to ask a 19-year-old college girl for help for his spark plugs or flat tire. If he really needs help, he can ask a group of people or a guy. So that's a good clue for girls. Don't stop. Listen to that instinct and move on, and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, if you even say anything at all. But it's okay to be rude to somebody, particularly strangers, if you feel that feeling of fear. I had a male victim of a rape, left his fast food restaurant. He got off work at 2 a.m. He was walking home, and a guy yelled at him from across the street and said, I need help, I need help. And he told me, I stood there for a split second, and this feeling kind of overwhelmed me that said, don't do it, don't do it. And he said, I didn't want to be rude and not help somebody. So he walked across the street. As soon as he got there, of course, the guy drug him behind the building and raped him. And so there you have that feeling that he unfortunately didn't listen to. 10 months later, that guy's parents called and said he still wasn't eating solid food. That's how traumatized and hurt and harmed that he had been by that rape. So that feeling, never, ever, ever ignore it. It's there for a reason. It will keep you safe, but you have to pay attention to it. And I really can't say that enough. I've had so many rape victims tell me, I knew better. If your brain says, I knew better, then don't do it.
You know, Lee, this kind of brings to mind Craig Douglas and Managing Unknown Contacts. You know, maybe the importance for all of us to have in place a script that we can resort to, that we don't have to rise to the occasion, but we know what we're going to say and how we're going to say it, which is, you know, that very first thing is, sorry, I can't help you. If they continue to encroach, should be moving at this point, you need to stay back, a little sterner. And then finally, that stay back, you know, I mean, in terms of a loud yell or scream, if you will. And if that person continues to encroach upon you, then at that point, they pretty much revealed their intentions. And, you know, maybe at that point, maybe some sort of defensive display or use of force may be in order. And the other thing I think it's important is that, uh, you know, over the years, I know I've talked to women that said their mothers always told them to walk around with their keychain in their hand with the keys between their fingers, or always to, you know, carry OC or pepper spray, or, you know, all you need to do was kick the man in the groin, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And that's really, if someone attacks you, it's not going to look like that. You know, having an understanding of what that movie actually looks like, and then being mentally prepared, and then better yet, physically prepared through, you know, maybe some
Mhm.
defensive training, I think goes a long ways in terms of keeping people, you know, safe from this crime.
And training is a
You-
tool in your toolbox. So why not add all the tools that you can into your toolbox? Because when you react to a crime, and a lot of rapists in particular have an advantage, because for a few moments, that victim is in complete disbelief and may not be able to
Right.
realize what's going on in time. So it's very, very important that you always are mentally prepared as well as physically. There's somebody bigger out there than all of us. It's all in your training, and you will revert to what you know. So it's very important. Take some self-defense classes, take awareness, anything you can do. It's a tool, and you need your toolbox to be full when you are a victim. It may actually prevent you from being a victim.
Yeah, I would like to point out here the late William April used to talk on that subject a bit, and he would say, caution people about these one night women's self defense seminars that it gave a false sense of security, and then that sense of security was wiped away when the girl would come home or the boyfriend would say, "Okay, get out of this hole," or their older brother would do it, just something like, and then they couldn't do that, and then the female was, well, I'm just totally defenseless, and they would give up at that point. He would say you have to would instill in them, the will to fight, and that nobody's allowed to put their hands on them without their permission. Uh, when I talk to teenage girls or teenage boys, for that matter, or anyone, women, is never get taken to crime scene number 2.
Never.
If someone tries to abduct you, you fight literally to the death right where you are, because if you go to crime scene number 2, it's not going to be good. Everything that happens between crime scene 1 and crime scene 2 is going to be utterly brutal. So you fight at the point where someone tries to abduct you, making as much noise and inflicting as much pain and damage as you can, because that's where you get away. If you're able to get away, that's where you win.
And the
You
abductor
have to instill
relies,
that in people.
yeah,
Go ahead.
that's true, very true. The abductor relies on get in the car, you won't get hurt. Well, that's exactly what he's going to do. An abductor's reason for moving you is because where he has originally seen you is likely too busy, too many people around. So he takes you to an isolated place. It will never end well for you, ever. You have a better chance of surviving that encounter or abduction or incident, whatever you call it, by trying to run away, screaming, creating as much chaos as you can. Those abductors, those rapists, those criminals don't like chaos. So do whatever you can do to create as much of that as possible. Once you get in the car, it will absolutely not end well for you. And you can't believe anyone if their intention is to harm you, because they'll say anything to gain compliance. That's their ultimate goal, is to gain compliance so they can rape you. Or worse, but that's a rapist goal, is to gain compliance, however means he feels necessary, to get you to be his victim. So you have to always never give up, and your instinct will tell you what to do, but most of my victims tell me that fighting back helped them and saved them to an extent.
Steve?
Well, the thing I'd just like to point out again is just kind of going back to Craig Douglas and some of these other guys. These guys are really putting out a lot of good content. Anything that you're going to pick up from them or anybody else, you're not going to gain a lot in a short duration class, but can get you started on a path in which, you know what, you can continue to train, and you could actually, if you do this successfully, have something to fall back on in terms of something to revert to. Sherri once mentioned, if if you need to reach for a tool and there's no tools in your toolbox, there's not much you can do. But if you can just have a few things in there that you can do and be willing to do, have an understanding for what this assault might actually look like, and the fact that this assault can come in different forms. I mean, okay, well, all right, well, date rape doesn't sound like that's probably something that's going to happen to, to me or, those around me. But what about acquaintance rape? Acquaintance may just be very well, you hardly know the person, but they know you. They're familiar with you, or they're familiar with someone that that you know. And then, of course, the stranger and serial rape. I know that that's not very common, but that's not much of a comfort if you're the anomaly and stuff like that does happen. And the stuff that people are willing to do nowadays, and like we could even take this off into, in some ways, the ultimate objective may not necessarily be sexual assault, but it could be sex trafficking. That is, you're being kidnapped and taken to a place where you can be basically sexually assaulted by others for commercial gain. Uh, there's a lot that we need to be aware of, and and hopefully just that knowledge will keep something like that from befalling us and our families.
And it's true, your brain is not going to revert to something you've learned once. So it is important that you keep training, you stay aware of classes, sign up for classes. What can you do? How can it hurt you to learn? To watch out for things like if you're leaving the grocery store with a bag and you see your car and right next to you on the left side is a van with a guy in it. Why would you load those groceries on that side of your car? Either wait it out or go to the other side of your car. It's things that people know, they just don't realize they know it. And it's tips like that. Stay aware and you'll stay safer. which leads us to human trafficking. Human trafficking is a lot easier of a crime to prove sometimes than sexual assault, because human trafficking is, the legal definition is, if you compel someone to have sex with other people for your profit, you're a human trafficker. And the only exception to that is if they're minors. We don't need to prove any of the elements of human trafficking if you're a minor. But the elements of human trafficking from a legal standpoint are fraud, force, or coercion. And those are pretty easy to explain. The force is easy. Everybody knows you can't compel someone to have sex with someone else while you profit off of it by using a gun, a knife, a rope, force, bodily injury. That's easy. The fraud, we didn't see a whole lot of fraud in human trafficking. Because that's the nanny or the model element. We suspect we didn't get a lot of those cases because those victims tend to not be able to escape. So of course, if you can't escape a situation, you can't file a police report. That's the nanny, the model, where you show up at a place and you think you're going to get a modeling job or a nanny job, and you're then thrust into a human trafficking situation. Those victims tend to not have told anybody where they're going. No one knows. They didn't route it out. They left no clue. And so those are very difficult cases to find the victims after you're victimized. The coercion is you can't manipulate, and there's a specific definition of that. And a good example of coercion in human trafficking is a guy who lived in an apartment. He saw his on the same landing, they shared apartments on that same landing, and she had a couple of kids, and she had just been through, he did his homework. Human traffickers are very patient people, but he did his homework. She had just come off of a nasty divorce and an even nastier custody battle. So she was, she didn't trust the system. She didn't trust the government, Child Protective Services, the police, any of those agencies. So he compelled her, and that's the key word, compelled. He compelled her to have sex with his friends to start with, and then it was strangers, by convincing her that he would call and report her for abusing her kids to Child Protective Services, and that she would lose them. So you see how he coerced her. He played on her fear of Child Protective Services and her experience, and he profited off of compelling her to have sex with other men. That's a good example of coercion in a case that we had of human trafficking. A lot of people don't understand the difference between prostitute and trafficking victim, or pimp and trafficker. And it's very easy. Once I tell you, everyone will say they knew that, they just didn't realize they knew it. So the difference is you have to look at the element of control. If the female or male, it's interchangeable, but for easier purposes, if the female is forced to prostitute by those factors, fraud, force, or coercion, if she is compelled and she has no choice for fear of death or injury or a factor like that, then she is a trafficking victim. A prostitute may feel like she has no choice, but if he is not compelling her by those three factors, then she's a prostitute. So it's easy to remember. You just look at the control, and that'll tell you whether she's a trafficking victim or a prostitute. Another good case for coercion, and this is a particularly sad case. Steve's heard this several times. You're going to get tired of hearing these cases one of these days, but a very good case, we got a conviction, was a single mother spent about 6 months, a lot of time convincing her 18-year-old daughter to have sex with men for money. And she convinced her daughter that they would be evicted. They'd have to go to a homeless shelter. They would be raped and starve. And eventually she was able to convince her daughter by those factors to have sex with other men for her profit. So you see how coercion is at play here. You can't compel someone by manipulating their weakness for your profit. So that's a pretty easy one to remember. Let's see, another thing that I always like to tell when I talk about human trafficking is don't get caught up in the trafficking part. People think that you fill a 18-wheeler or you smuggle someone from place to place, but human trafficking, sex trafficking doesn't have anything to do with movement from one location to the next. You can actually be, just like the girl I told you about, you can actually be a human trafficking victim and never leave your home. Another case we had was two parents allowed men to come into the house, and they charged $50 for these men to have sex with their 8-year-old and $80 for the men to have sex with their 5-year-old for their profit. So they are human traffickers, and people don't realize that it's really so close to home. We could throw some rocks and hit a house with some form of trafficking because people think that it's a border problem, but it's not. It's a compelling sex with another person while you profit. It's a money-making machine is what human trafficking is. And that's why it's out there and it's so prevalent, because these traffickers make money off of this, and human beings are so reusable that it can continue and continue and continue. So do you see the difference though in the motivations of sexual assault and the motivations of human trafficking?
Yeah.
They're very different crimes.
Hey, Sherri, talk about the one at Denny's, which I think that had elements of both trafficking and sexual assault.
Yes, a girl met a guy online, like everybody seems to be doing nowadays. She did everything she thought she was supposed to do. They met at a Denny's, what do you call Denny's? Restaurant, breakfast place? I don't know, but a Denny's. And they ate their meal, and right as they were finished, he jabbed her in the thigh under the table with a needle. And she woke up in a Louisiana motel. And if it hadn't been for the apartment video, I wouldn't have believed the sheer numbers. But in the span of that weekend, he brought 40 men to that hotel room to have sex with her. And what's so compelling about this case is the 40 men that had sex with her, they are not traffickers. They didn't profit off of that. They are rapists. They've committed the crime of sexual assault. They knew she was drugged. They knew she was incapacitated and unable to consent. So they're in that case, they're the rapists. The trafficker is the one who jabbed her in the thigh. He's the one running the operation. He's the one profiting. And in that particular case, he actually didn't have sex with her. But if he had, you would have both crimes. But as a detective, you would want to go with the human trafficking because it's a federal crime and you tend to get longer sentences and they serve day to day than most state crimes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff like that that's especially, frightening to me, is because, this was I know where this Denny's was. It was in a very nice part of Fort Worth, just north of 820. It's a nice, area and everything. Lots of nice restaurants. And it would seem like she did everything proper. She met this guy at a public area at a nice enough diner, and then this took place. And so all of a sudden, it makes it real obvious to me that people that I never thought might be a victim of sex trafficking actually are more of a target than I had ever considered.
It's true. And there's like rapists, there's different kinds of traffickers. The college campus is ripe for human trafficking because the trafficker in a college atmosphere will tend to select that student that we all know, the one who's isolated, lonely, the one who's neglected, trying to fit in, trying to be popular, hasn't ever been away from home, has no real family, or if they do have family, came from generally an abusive atmosphere. the one who escaped poverty. Those are high risk factors. Anybody, like Steve said, can be a human trafficking victim, but those are the high risk factors. And in a college type atmosphere, the college cases we've had with trafficking, once that trafficker selects his victim, he'll work to gain their trust, either as a close friend or boyfriend. He'll work at becoming that victim's inner circle, the one the victim depends on, trust. As soon as he does that, pays a few bills for her, gets her to rely on him, then he will coerce her by saying something like, well, it's time you do your part in this relationship or this friendship. And it starts out generally with, I need you to have sex with a couple of my friends. That's a way for you to pay me back for all that I've done. But in reality, he set this whole thing up. And then the couple of friends becomes 10, 15, 20, and then becomes strangers. And before you know it, he's the one making a lot of money off of forcing her to engage in trafficking. A college theme I see a lot is the trafficker will convince her that he'll share drugs with her. He'll give her the drugs, pay for them, give them to her, provide them. And then he'll say, I will report you to the dean's office and you'll lose your scholarship. You'll be kicked out of this university. And then I'll take you back home to the home where you were physically and sexually abused to start with. And so that's a big compelling factor on colleges, is that I'll report you and get you kicked out. Believe it or not, we see that a lot, more often than you would think. So colleges are ripe. You know, as law enforcement, as you know, it's very difficult to get human trafficking victims to cooperate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the big reasons we see is she's been taught that if she reports him, we might arrest him. He might even get convicted, but then what'll happen to her? And so what people don't realize is the human trafficking victim's only education and only educator is that trafficker. So these victims, that's why it's so important to get the word out. These victims don't realize there's help, like Cross Timbers or One Safe Place or these victim advocate agencies. So they tend to not report it because their trafficker is the evil they know versus the evil they don't know. And they will continue to be victims because they're being fed. There's a house, a roof over their head, shelter, and they don't know who they will turn to if they report him. So this is the stuff he teaches her. So it's important that you know there's a lot of help out there. Another reason is that trauma bond. Everybody's heard of that. It's very difficult to get a human trafficking victim to help us when she's been convinced by this trafficker that she gets to live every day and doesn't get beat up every day because he allows that. He allows her to live every day and he doesn't beat her. So there's a big trauma bond. It's a very conflicted victim. So they're very difficult cases, but once we get the case, it's reported and we investigate it, we do tend to get those convictions on human trafficking. Then there's a lot of hurdles, but those are just a few that we're touching on. I bet a lot of people didn't know the difference between a prostitute and a trafficking victim.
Yeah.
That's always new. I always get some people that thought a pimp is a trafficker. They're not anything the same.
You know, Lee,
Well,
go ahead.
no, Steve, go ahead.
I was telling Sherri, it's been maybe 10 years ago or so. I believe I was with Hani Mahmood and we were serving warrants and we arrested a guy on a bench warrant and we took him into the Tarrant County Jail. And when we went into the area where the prisoners are booked, there was a half dozen what I thought of as prostitutes. No, they were sitting there waiting to be booked. And while our guy was being fingerprinted and, doing all the stuff that he had to do before being, taken into the proper jail itself, I was kind of watching them and I was so struck by the fact that they didn't look like anything I ever thought a prostitute would look like. They looked like they were 17 or 18 years old. They were very young. They didn't dress real provocative. And they were just so agitated and nervous. I mean, I told people they were literally grooming each other. You could just tell, how distraught they were. And I was like going, golly, girls, you really should have need to make better choices. This is not the way that you need to conduct your lives. And then once I became aware of what a problem sex trafficking was, and I realized those were probably, I'm completely sure of it, they were just victims. I've never have quite forgiven myself for being so judgmental. And so now this is just really kind of a big deal to me. And I don't think people really realize how much of this takes place in our communities. Uh, at what risk our children and our grandchildren may be, and this is just something that we don't want happening around us. So this is one of the reasons that, like I said, I kind of badgered Sherri to come on a couple of podcasts. I wanted to do that one with Brian. I wanted to do this one. Really kind of wanted to focus mostly on sexual assault on this one, just simply
Mhm.
because we hadn't addressed that topic before. But I also appreciate the fact that you let us talk about sex trafficking also. And I hope all this information is of value to someone.
Sure, sure. If we could pivot for a second and go back to assault and the reporting aspect, I want to talk about underreporting, and then I want to talk about false reporting for just a second. In your experience, and I know this is going to be a kind of a guesstimation thing, how much underreporting do you think it is? People that are actually victims of a sexual assault and they don't report it for whatever reason, and what are some of those?
Uh, Probably double. We have twice as many victims as we know of. And I always say the key to all of this is information, education, and knowledge. And we cannot help if we don't know. Report it, let us look into it. Uh, if the elements are met, we'll make the arrest. If he's innocent, and my unit, my sex crimes unit, when I was a detective as well as a supervisor, we always prided ourselves on the fact that the system has to work for everybody, or it doesn't work at all. And who wants to operate in a broken system? Because in a broken system, none of us are safe. So it was as important as a detective, and I taught my detectives, it's as important that you properly investigate a case. Therefore, you have to be properly trained. And it's as important that you clear the innocent as arrest the guilty. Nobody wants to arrest an innocent man, and no one wants to let a guilty one go. So it's very important that you investigate properly. I get a lot, even at the college here, I get a lot of rape victims that say, well, my friend was raped and the police never did anything. And then when I look into it, the friend never reported it. So, and I get that rape is a vicious and hideous crime, and it can be a life-altering crime as well. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of apprehension, a lot of they'll beat me up on the stand. I get that a lot. I don't want to get beat up on the stand. Well, let's get it to that point, because in my experience, victims heal better when they have some sort of help. We don't even necessarily have to get the conviction, but just to have me walk through the system with a rape victim, most of the time they tell me that process in itself helps them heal. People who don't report it, who keep it in, who suffer through it alone, they tend to not be as productive as they could have been. So you have to report it. Let us sort it out. We'll sort it out. If we can make the arrest, we will. If we can't, we'll tell you why we can't. But at least report it.
Did you see in your area an uptick in false reports during the whole Me Too movement in the last couple of years?
I did, and delayed reports are their own beast. I have successfully gotten cases prosecuted for delay reports. The false reports, it's what's funny is whenever we go into war somewhere in the world, there's a huge increase in rape cases, and false reports. And I didn't realize that until Bush took us into war, and suddenly we began to realize we have even more cases than our normal caseload, which was high anyway. There were only 4 of us in the city of Fort Worth. And so I asked, one of the girls came in, she filed a rape case, and I knew based on a lot of factors that she was lying about it. And I asked her why, and she said, when we go into war, the boyfriends and the husbands leave. And in her case, she had gotten pregnant and her husband was due back. And so that's her reason to lie. I get a lot of girls who break curfew and they're going to get kicked out of their parents' house. So all of a sudden they're a rape victim. And, 7 out of 10, by far the majority of rape cases filed are true. They might be a case of he saw the situation differently than her, like those lack of consents we talked about briefly. It might be where 2 people see the same thing in a different way. It may not be a rape case, but by far 7 out of 10 are true cases. 3 out of 10 on average are false reports. And I have arrested women. In my experience, I never arrested a man for a false police report. My experience is with women. I used a very strict criteria because you don't want to arrest easily for a false police report. So my criteria was there had to be harm caused to him. He had to lose custody or a job or be arrested. He had to suffer some loss. She had to name him. I didn't arrest anyone. My criteria is so strict on that I didn't arrest her for a false police report if her suspect was a white male. Because for my criteria, for my unit's criteria, there's no harm actually suffered to a guy. I got her confession, I documented it, but to arrest a woman who filed a false police report, I needed that strict criteria, and I needed the whole thing to be a fairy tale. One woman, I got 2 years. She got convicted and got sentenced for 2 years. And this will kind of explain how we picked our battles, because you never want to, if you're not a very, very good investigator, you could accuse a true victim of a false report. So the key is in training and being a very good investigator. So if you're not an excellent investigator, you really don't have any business arresting people for false police report. It has to be ironclad, 100% false, and with the confession and the explanation. So one woman that I arrested for false police report, her ex-husband was getting remarried, and of course, that made her very jealous and bitter. And so she had her mother pull her hair extensions out and bash her face into the wall. And then she reported to us that her ex-husband had raped her and beat her. And I brought him in because I never worked a case where I didn't try to offer the suspect the opportunity. There are 2 sides to every story. And sometimes you get your suspect in and you end up with a confession. So it always benefits the detective to at least touch base and try to get the suspect to come in and give his story and his version of events. So I brought him in and he was able to prove that he had been in Hawaii. And she just didn't know that he had a destination wedding. He actually was in Hawaii at the same day and time that she said he raped her and beat her. So I was able to arrest her because there's that criteria of the entire scenario was false. He never was at her house that day. He didn't pull her hair out. He didn't do anything. He was actually in another state. So that was a good false police report case. And it caused harm to him. and she named him. It's hideous to think of naming a guy as a rape suspect if he didn't do it. So it's just so important that your department train you to investigate these cases. And like I said, my criteria was very strict on that, because you run the risk of a true victim being falsely accused of a false report. And you also run the risk of scaring off legitimate victims. They don't want to talk to you. They won't want to report to you. So my best advice is report it, let us sort it out. But I can't help you if I don't know. And that's so true.
Steve, we're getting close to the end of our time here, so I want to try to give people some solutions, and then I'm going to get on a soapbox to close this out. But Steve, before we do that, what training suggestions do you have that for women, for people that have teenage children that are going off to college, et cetera? What's some good advice and some good training that you would give to those people?
Well, I think in terms of good advice, especially for the people themselves, the young men and women going off to school and everything, is be aware how serial rapists, how stranger rapists, how date rape, acquaintance rape, all this stuff can work, and do what you can to not put yourself in a position. Obviously, if you're going to go out and you're going to go do some drinking with some friends, if you're going to go out to a bar, all these places, these are things where these are situations and when stuff like this can happen. I know that there have been situations where men have preyed on women that were either intoxicated or inebriated. I know of instances where they put something in the drink that caused the woman to basically be incapacitated. It's not that uncommon. And just be aware, if you're going to go out to a place like that, you want to go out in numbers, and you want to watch everyone else's back. The other thing is be aware when you're in public of persons and everything that's going on around you. Very much as Sherri and you said, don't keep your ear pods on, don't wear your headphones, don't keep your nose buried in your phone. Anytime you're in a transitional area like a parking lot or like an ATM or a service station, focus on going from point A to point B, and don't try to multitask and look at something on your phone or something at the same time. Be aware of what's going on. Indeed, if you see anything that looks a little bit what we might refer to as hinky, go ahead and act upon it. It doesn't mean you're paranoid, but go ahead, give it a little bit of scrutiny. And if you've got a little bit of doubt about it, then don't put yourself in a position where that you can be compromised. I think understanding the managing of unknown contacts, if someone puts you in a situation that causes you to feel some concern, being able to say from the very beginning, sorry, I can't help you, and increasing your distance from them if they continue to move on them, be able, to say something like the effect, you need to stay back, and eventually stay back. Go ahead and get some training. As you know, we're firearm trainers. We'd like to see more people become, competent with firearms. Along with that, learn how to use OC. I'm a big advocate of martial arts, especially like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of stuff like that. That's good. But the main thing is just understand that yes, indeed, we could all become a victim of crime, and be looking for anything that would cause us concern and have a plan for dealing with it. I think that's a good way to go.
I tell the guys out here at the college, my best advice is if she's drinking, pass it up. Catch her later. It's funny, but it's so true. It will save a lot of heartache. And my best advice to the girls is don't drink so much that you give up control of the 3 feet around you in every direction. Don't willingly give that up.
Yeah, the alcohol is a big thing, and I once worked in a campus setting, And I can't tell you how many reports of sexual assault or girl who wanted to talk to an officer. She went to the hospital and the hospital called and we were dispatched there to where the girl's like, I got drunk and I blacked out and I feel like something happened to me, but I don't know if it did or exactly what did happen. And that's the thing. If you're drinking to that point, okay, you are putting yourself at danger. Sherri, do you have any resources that you could point people to?
Out in Stephenville, Cross Timbers is an excellent resource. They'll help everybody. In Fort Worth, One Safe Place, but every town, every city, every state has these agencies. You just need to look up your local agency. There's a national human trafficking hotline. There's a rape hotline. Just learn those numbers, put those numbers in your phone, put your police department number in your phone, the address, know where it's at. It's the basic stuff. Don't load your groceries in on the side. There's a guy sitting in a car. Don't get gas at midnight. I mean, there's a lot of common sense things that people can do to avoid being selected as a victim. And if you are, then listen to your instinct and it will tell you how to handle that situation and survive it.
Oh, one thing I might add now that I had a moment to think about it. If you're at a service station and you're filling your car up, lock the doors, go ahead, start filling up the car, and then either stand. My preference is I want to stand between either the front or the rear of my car and the windows to where the store is. And I want to be in a position where someone can't push me into my car, or as I'm getting into my car, they open the passenger door and jump in. And that's something that I've seen happen quite a bit.
That's very true.
All right, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a moment and I'm going to fuss at some parents. And it's going to come off as fussing, but it's really not fussing. It's really intended for you to think about what you're telling your children and the tone that you are setting. I was the evening shift supervisor, and it was on a Saturday. And I had gotten all my officers, gotten their assignments, and they had all already left the station. And I finished up some paperwork, and I come walking out in the parking lot to get in my patrol car and leave. And a young man approaches me in the parking lot and says, I have a friend that's been hurt. I think she's been hurt. Would you talk with her? And he gets this girl to get out of the car, and we go talk. And what has happened to her is in a college dorm, her roommate allowed the roommate invited her boyfriend to come visit her. And the roommate boyfriend brought along two friends. Well, the roommate and her boyfriend were having sex in the roommate's bed, and the two friends decided to help themselves to the young lady that was in the parking lot talking to me. And it was very clear to me that this was a legit multiple party gang rape of what happened to this young lady. And Sherri, you're going to understand my frustration as I relay this story to you. She had not yet taken a shower. She had saved the clothes that she wore, and she had not stripped the sheets off of the bed and washed them. So every bit of DNA evidence I would have needed to have gotten a conviction was preserved at that point. She did not know their full names, but she knew their first names, and we knew that they had gotten access to the room by the roommate's boyfriend. So I knew I could track them down. Ultimately, she refused to file a report because her father had beaten it into her that she was not allowed to let boys come into her dorm room. And to report the crime, she was going to have to admit to her father that boys were allowed in the dorm room. And I tried to explain it to her. I think your father will understand that your roommate allowed them in, that you didn't do this. This horrible thing has happened to you. But ultimately, she could not get over that she would have to report to her father. And so I often think about that girl and what she has lived with since then. I hope she got help. I hope she got counseling. But I know that there are two rapists running loose that I could have put in prison.
Mhm.
And, yeah, on all the cop shows in the movies, you always had the one about the case that haunts them. That's mine. That's the one that haunts me. I know I could have had him after all of the frustrating false reports or he said, she said, or unfounded cases that I worked. Um, to have one that I know I could have gotten a successful prosecution on and could have put legitimate bad guys in prison. And because that tone had been set in that home of you shall not allow a boy in your dorm room, didn't.
Well, she's also been probably taught that
Mhm.
things like that are her fault.
Yeah, she
So,
felt like she had done wrong.
yeah, that's,
Yeah.
I just had to close a case not too long ago of a college girl that had a party and
Mhm.
was raped, and her parents convinced her they would get in more trouble for hosting the party and providing the alcohol in the home the parents bought for her to live in while she's in college. So the parents actually
Yeah.
own that home. And I
Yeah.
spent days and days and days trying to convince her and them that alcohol at this point is a non-factor, but they could never get over they were going to get sued. And so I couldn't get her to file either.
The other thing that I have found repeatedly frustrating is parents that can't accept that their little girl had sex. And Steve, we're getting a lot of background noise from your mic.
Yeah, I get that a
They
lot.
just can't accept the fact that their little girl had sex. And when it becomes readily apparent that that's what's happened, then the little girl says she was raped because she can't admit to her parents that she had sex.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then that starts this whole thing of the whole legal system that gets going. Parents, if you're parents, how did you get your children? You engaged in sexual activity. Guess what? We're humans. This is how the species propagates. So I understand all this stuff that goes along with it, but understand that's how you got here. That's how your children got here. And that's how humans continue to be humans.
True. And if sex is compelled by those
Right.
factors, then it's a crime. If not, then it's
Right.
not.
Right.
It sometimes is that simple.
Yeah. I'm going to break internet character here a little bit. I normally keep my family life of living family members completely separated because of some other issues in the past. I had an online stalker and all that kind of stuff years ago. And so to protect my family, I just made that decision. Now I'm no longer in the public eye position that I once was. Okay, folks, I have a teenage daughter, a cute blonde teenage daughter. And here's the talk that I had with her. It's yours. Do with it what you want to with it. It's not mine. Yeah. It's up to you to decide who you engage in that activity with. I said, but here are the things you need to understand. You are forever emotionally tied to this person. You are forever physically tied to this person. There are consequences. You get pregnant. Do you want to raise a child with no help? Do you want to have to every other weekend turn your child over to someone that you hate? Or that may not be a good setting for them. All of those things, you need to take that into account as part of your decision making. I said, but you will never, ever, ever be in trouble for telling me, Daddy, I decided to do this. All right. Daddy understands. And you will not be in trouble with me if that's the decision you make. The counterpoint to that is if you ever come home and said, Daddy, someone did this to me without my permission, I whatever, understand Daddy's going full daddy mode. Okay. That's the thing. I will give you the trust. You had the permission, you make your decision. But understand if you ever tell me that this has happened to you, that I'm going to go all out with every bit of resource I can muster, every favor I can call in, everything, because Daddy's going to believe you.
course.
because you will not be in trouble with me for choosing to have sex. And yeah,
You'll appreciate this. This Fort
Yeah.
Worth officer that I worked with, his
yeah,
daughter got married. She was 30 at the time, but she got married. And at the reception, you'll love this story being the dad of
Yeah.
a teenager.
Yeah.
At the reception, he walked over to the groom and he handed the groom a bullet in front of everybody. And he said, son, I want you to hang on to this. You ever break anything but her heart or hurt anything but her feelings, the next one's coming a lot faster.
yeah, yeah. It's just amazing, this whole social construct that we put on this physical act and everything. And I understand all the ramifications that can come with it. But this whole social construct with it is just, it's this beautiful thing, and we make it somehow sometimes be evil. And
Those are
we've
very real thing out there.
and I got called one night by a father wanting some advice. And he was kind of in this position with his teenage daughter. He suspected something would happen, but his daughter was not being forthcoming with him. And he's like, how can I get her to open up and talk with me? And I said, you can tell her that it's okay if she had sex, and tell her that you're her daddy, that you'll still love her, and that you'll understand. And that if she tells you that's what happened, that's the end of this. But if she tells you she was raped, then we need to start the process. And the daddy said, okay, I'm going to follow that advice. And it worked out well from that end. And there's no 100% bulletproof advice you can give you, but
Right.
what I'm trying to get at with this is, don't create this whole atmosphere or your child is afraid to tell you the truth.
That's right. They'll tell someone, if not you. And then
Yeah.
they may not get the help they need.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah,
to trust you. And another good point is your son or daughter should have a code word. If they ever call you and say this particular code word, then that means
Yeah.
they're in trouble. They need help, and no questions asked. Go get them.
Yeah. I'm almost more afraid to let my son, I have a son as well, who's getting to be a teenager. I'm almost more afraid for him than I was with my daughter. And because quite frankly, she just hates everybody and won't have anything to do with you guys. So I don't have to worry about that. I'm like trying to fix her up with people, and she's like, no, I'm not interested. But
That's why
it's
the system has to work for everybody. It has to work for your
Yeah.
son, and it has to work for your daughter. And true rape
Yeah.
victims should be encouraged and supported.
right.
And they have to feel encouraged and supported, or they won't report it and they won't get the help that they need to heal.
Right.
It is.
And
Go ahead.
for those parents, if you're creating that atmosphere where your children are scared to come forward to you and tell you the truth and everything, you are perpetuating a broken system.
Yes.
And you are perpetuating false reporting, and you're perpetuating underreporting. You are part of that, both sides of that same problem. We flip that coin, no matter which way it lands, you're on it. So think about the tone that you are setting with your children. Just think about that. Sherri, you got anything in closing?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Steve, you got anything in closing?
No, only that you kind of made me think. I've had people talk about how their child lied to them. And so my first question it always is, well, why do you think that they lied to you? And they're go, well, didn't want to get in trouble. And I go, well, they feared your reaction. So
Right.
why is it would they fear your reaction? So that's something that, I think it's real important for all of us to think about. That is what signals are we sending to our children that would cause them to feel like they couldn't tell us the truth because they were concerned that the reaction would be stronger, or too much for them to handle.
Right. Your child should never fear a consequence for telling you the truth. It really is that simple.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming on tonight and sharing your valuable insight and your information to our audience. I know that this was not our normal content, but I hope you find it valuable. Also to our audience, if you have heartburn or you're okay with my little soapbox section out there at the end, please send those comments to me privately rather than those being plastered about the internet to shine lights on the fact of my truth. I broke internet character and security a little bit tonight for this message, but I don't want to advertise the fact to anyone who is seeking information on my family. That will put that out there. That has been an issue for me in the past, but again, I'm not in the same public light that I am now, though I was then. Uh, yeah, again, thank you for your time, audience. We understand that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.